This is from Neil Harrison. Why is it when out for a walk do some dogs like each other and some just growl and bark immediately?
So, what I love about questions from owners and people who live with dogs is that I am also an owner and a person who lives with dogs, right? And I have all these questions myself. But sometimes I'm surprised that we forget, right, how ordinary it is, for instance, in this case, to have personality differences in dogs, where maybe some are sociable and some are not. In humans, we might call that an introvert and an extrovert. While being a social species, there's still a lot of variations in terms of just individual preferences. So I think you could have dogs who prefer to be with people. We used to call them people dogs, as opposed to dogs who prefer to be with dogs, dog dogs. We could have, in that situation, you could have a dog who's fearful of other dogs, maybe because they didn't meet a lot of other dogs early in their life, or they had bad experience with some dogs. They weren't well socialized. And so their fear is manifest as sort of this aggressive-like behaviors. You could have something like that. So they're just personality differences that are either developmental or just genetic. Within a litter. I just saw this litter of 11. We recently got a new puppy from this litter of 11, and they're all over the place, right? They're widely different personalities. And I've been watching them since birth. I can't trace a thing, an event. But we know their genes are, 50% alike and 50% dissimilar. So you even see that in closely related dogs.
Sandra Bambling asks a question which you will have heard asked before. Why do they eat poo?
I have heard that question asked before. Yeah. So coprophagia is like what we like to call it, so we don't have to say eat poo. And there are good possible reasons for that. I mean, one is it's actually a source of nutrients, right? So we and all animals excrete perfectly good nutrients that maybe weren't digestible by our stomach, but digestible by somebody else's. So it smells quite strong. Dogs have this terrific sense of smell. They zoom in on it and tastes good. Sometimes there's a specific deficiency in dogs' diet that leads them to more coprophagia, in which case a vet can help you, resolve that. But yeah, the things that are disgusting to us are often not disgusting to them, and I find that fascinating.
This is from Michelle. Why does my dog bring me a present, tea towel, a cushion, when I come home, but not actually let me take it? I'm allowed to look, but not actually receive it.
That's great. I wonder what kind of dog that is. I'd like to just see it, but I feel like part of what's puzzling about that is just because you call it a present. I don't think it is a present. It's just the thing that the dog grabs when they're excited. And actually, it's really nice if they grab a toy or a towel or something when they're excited, because then they're not, mouthing you. They've probably been taught, rightly so, that, they shouldn't be biting people. And so if you have something in your mouth, you can't do that. But when you're excited, if you're dog, you tend to nip, 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 nip. That's what they do with each other. So probably it's just that your dog's excited and bringing something to help tamp down that excitement, so that they give you a good greeting.
Do dogs feel guilty when they have, for example, chewed up your shoes, stolen food?
Right. Yeah. So one of my whole lines of research is about these attributions, anthropomorphisms that we make of dogs, like that they feel guilty when they've done something wrong. And they certainly have a guilty look. So I actually did a study to see if that guilty look appeared more often when they had done something to feel guilty about, something wrong, than when they hadn't. And what we found is, first of all, that owners could not guess at a rate better than chance whether their dog had actually done something wrong or not when they just arrive at home and there's no visible stuffing out of the couch or garbage turned over. And what I also found is that dogs show that guilty look no more when they're actually guilty than when they aren't. But they do show the guilty look more when owners scold them.
Mm.
Or come at them or use a tone of voice, are about to scold them. And what that indicates to me is that behavior, the guilty look, is just a submissive behavior, reacting usually to us to avoid being punished or anything. Sometimes it co-occurs with having done something wrong, and often it co-occurs with not having done anything wrong, but we don't remember and notice those times. So it looks like that guilty look, which is our indication that the dog looks guilty, doesn't map to, potentially feeling guilty. Now, does that mean they don't feel guilty? No, I'm not saying that. I and any scientist cannot have conclusive word on whether they feel guilty or hubris or skeptical, because I can't get in their head, right? And they can't tell me. But I think it's likely they understand some of the right rules and wrong rules in your house after you've taught them. But it's not obvious to me that they feel guilty for something that they've done wrong, especially a long time ago, and that's why they're showing you that guilty look. So I'm agnostic about it, because I don't think scientists can weigh in about what exactly is the subjective experience of another animal. But I do know that look they give us is their response to us, not their response to their own behavior.
I can just tell you, Alexandra, they don't ever feel skeptical. They are too pure.
I think that's probably right. They're not cynical, right? Yeah. But they might be ironic sometimes. I wish I knew how to test that. I've tried to figure out how to test whether dogs have a sense of irony, because sometimes it feels like they do, or they appreciate a paradoxical situation, but it's very tricky to test.
That's interesting. They react in a certain way to something that is amusingly odd.
Yes, right. Or they create a situation which is sort of counter to, that it is sort of theatrically counter to what you'd think. So let's say I'm trying to play fetch with my dog, and she just won't return the ball to me, and I finally give up, and then she arrives with the ball, afterward. What is that, right? Is she thinking, now I really want to play, now that I see you're not going to play with me? Or is she like, look, isn't this funny? Now I'm going to be the retriever, because now you're not looking for the retriever. Do they have that sense of that tension? I don't know. It feels like it sometimes. And maybe we don't need to scientifically validate whether they do or not. I think that's also fair.
I'd love to know, this is from Owen Kilmister, I'd love to know why most refuse to learn from others. We had 3 dogs at one point, one of whom mastered the art of putting her paw in her bowl so she could easily polish off the contents. None of the others ever copied her, opting instead for the push around floor method. Now, I'd say something counter to what Owen asks, because as you know, I have 1 Labrador and 2 West Highland Terriers, and Labradors are ravenous, wolf-like dogs when it comes to their appetite. It's as if they don't think they're ever going to eat again. And they stuff their faces at every opportunity. And Westies don't. Westies, I know from other people who have Westies and Terriers such as those, they might have a little bit of breakfast and leave it in the bowl and then come back later on, and that, which is unthinkable for a Labrador. But my Westies have both, and certainly the younger one, have learned from him to have it now and to have all of it. And she, the little one, she eats like a lab. So I just wonder if she might have learned that, or she might have realized that it's just a means of survival in our house. But interesting. Learning from each other is the essence of that question.
Yeah, the dogs do learn from each other. I mean, there is good scientific evidence and plenty of anecdotal evidence that they do. That doesn't mean they will in every situation, right? I mean, neither do humans. I see other people doing something spectacular, and I still do it kind of mezzo. I can't just look at what someone else is doing and always map it to myself. And there might be good reason, as you suggest, Nikki, that they just have different styles, different preferences about how to eat. And that's what's causing that. But they do learn from others, which is actually a terrific, fascinating social cognitive skill that we don't see in all animals that have been tested, and that, you know, makes them more like humans in the way that they learn.
Surely it's an evolutionary no-brainer in terms of survival, and also in terms of teaching your young how to survive.
In some social species, yeah, right. But so the question is there are two points to what you say. One is, are they teaching? Are they explicitly and intentionally teaching? So if I do a behavior, is it to demonstrate that to someone else? It's a question about whether all animals do that, or is it just I'm doing behaviors and other animals might pick up on that behavior? Is it sort of a contagious behavior? That's still, the latter is still learning from others. And yes, you do see it in lots of social animals. But if you're an animal who basically lives in isolation, then your problem solving is mostly not about learning from other conspecifics, other members of your species. It's from trial and error, right? So in social species, it's a pretty good solution.
From Caroline, without doubt, my 3 rescue dogs, 2 nervous, under-socialized ones from Afghanistan, react according to my inner emotions, without doubt. When I encounter and greet friends, acquaintances, and my not-so-favorite people alike, I'm amazed that they are in simpatico with my true thoughts and emotions, regardless of my consistent greetings.
I mean, there is evidence that dogs pick up on our emotions in this, as we've just been talking about, that emotions can be contagious. In other words, just like they can learn a behavior from someone else, they can kind of learn how we should feel about a situation from someone else. And there are probably 2 reasons for that. One is our behavior. Even if you don't think that you're acting differently to someone who you like and someone who you fear or hate, you know, you are acting differently, and they are very good readers of our behavior. You know, I really consider them little anthropologists. They study us. So they notice the differences in how we're holding ourselves, how we present ourselves, our tone of voice. And also we do know that they can smell, they have the equipment, the olfactory equipment to smell certain hormones. So if you're particularly angry, you know, you really have really high stress level, they can pick up on that. And in fact, they might get more stressed themselves. Again, that contagion. So there are arenas where it does feel like they're, you know, in our heads, but I think they're just really good perceivers of us.
Yes, when other human beings are blind to it, they can perceive those little things.
Dogs are always looking, and they're always noticing differences.
Di K asks, I had a wonderful rescue Rottweiler who seemed to give back so much to us. She'd been abandoned and then in kennels for 9 months before she came to us. She gained confidence and was truly amazing. Do dogs feel grateful?
So again, there are lots of places that science, I think, doesn't really tread. What would it look like? All I can do is look at what the behavior would be, the behavior of thankfulness or gratefulness. And I don't know that I could distinguish it from just pure affection, right? And attachment. If you have a dog who's loyal to you and attached to you, that's like a normal dog. If that dog had a past where, from which you needed to rescue them, that will also feel like gratitude. And if you have a dog who had a perfectly ordinary past, it might not feel like gratitude. So again, I can't say one way or the other. I think you can, I think it seems fine to think that they feel grateful, that that's part of their affection, but science can't confirm that. And that's okay that science can't confirm it. Doesn't mean it's not there.
It's love. They love the situation they're in and the person that they're with, I guess. And if it was a very bad situation before, that love was stifled and they weren't able. This is another, actually, this comes up and has come in one of the questions. This notion of unconditional love. People always talk about that when they're discussing dogs. I'm not sure if it is unconditional love, because if you're going to treat a dog cruelly, and some dogs come from desperate, wretched situations as rescue dogs. They don't love their owners in those situations, if I can use the word owners. They don't love those people there, and they come to a completely different situation and they're treated with kindness, and they do love. So it's not unconditional, is it?
They don't form attachment to everyone, and they certainly, if they're abused, I mean, I think that idea comes from the fact that through force of will or force of situation, they're sometimes obliged to stay with someone who is abusing them. They don't have another option. So do they still love them? I don't know. I mean, they're attached, they're sort of required, they're attached, dependent on them. But they won't behave toward them the way that they would behave toward the person who treats them well. But they're still not gonna always be aggressive. What they don't do is sort of regularly turn on the person who treats them badly and get out of there. They stick around. That's their person who is feeding them, giving them shelter, something like that.
How do they know them to the minute what time their meals are going to be?
I think that's a great question. So this sort of idea of the dog's sense of time. I mean, their whole body is tuned to, just like ours, circadian rhythms. They have a normal sense of when you should be sleeping and waking and eating. And if we are reliable about when we feed them, then they learn that just the way you have a feeling that it's time to eat, or time you should get up from your, it's been an hour, that how it's been an hour. How do you know that? That's not something you're consciously doing. And dogs are sensitive to that too. Furthermore, there's very little going on in most dogs' days. Most owned dogs do not have a lot happening during the majority of the day. Maybe they have a couple of walks if they're lucky, and they have 1 or 2 meal times. You're going to know when those landmarks are in your day. If the rest of the day, you're alone, which was the case, before everybody was working from home, or you're being ignored because someone is doing something else. So I think it's a major landmark in their day, and their bodily system and their mind is anticipating it and learns the time of day.
That was from Mad Vixen, that question. I love these questions. They're so good. And there's another one which is related to time and circadian rhythms. And this is from Michelle. Have they any concept of time? I get the same reaction from my boy when I enter the room, whether I've just been upstairs or if I've been away a week. Now, if I can just add my thought to that. If I've been away on a business trip for 2 weeks, when we used to do such things, I used to sometimes go to the other side of the world to film on Australia, and I'd come back a couple of weeks later, a week and a half later, and they go crazy, absolutely crazy. 3 of them jumping all over me, and they knew I hadn't been there for a long time. I'm convinced of it. Or maybe it was because of my reaction, because I hadn't seen them for a long time. I don't know. But certainly if I come back from being away for a day or 2, they're pleased to see me, but there isn't quite that explosion. So what about that, the sense of time?
Yeah, I think you're right. They do distinguish how long you've been gone. Now, you're lucky that the question asker is lucky that their dog greets them enthusiastically when they've been gone 5 minutes. That's sweet, that's charming. But in fact, there was a really lovely research that by 2 researchers, Rem and Keeling, which looked at the degree of enthusiasm of the dog's greeting when somebody had been left the house for 5 minutes or 45 minutes or 2 hours, something like that. And it was more intense the longer they'd been gone. Not reams more intense, not you've been gone 3 weeks, Nikki, and we thought it was forever, but more intense, more tail wag, more lip licking, more jumping, measurably more intense. So I think what it is that we're not usually measuring that closely. And so if we're gone 10 minutes or we're gone for half a day, it just seems like a big greeting in either case. but there's a difference. And I think that difference tells us that they know that more time has elapsed. Absolutely.
Would love to know why dogs shake themselves off regularly. I've read somewhere it's like a reset button. There's that lovely sound that Labradors make, the flap, 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 flap of their ears that you can hear upstairs.
You know, I think that's right. I have proposed, but I haven't tested that that the shake is kind of changing situations. So two dogs, you might see it, for instance, when two dogs are playing and then one is ready to stop and move on. They'll shake off. Sometimes you see it when two dogs meet and one shakes off because they want to have more of a social interaction. So I think it is a kind of change of activity, change of situation. It also, what I'm really interested in studying, I haven't been able to do this yet, but is I think it's a way of distributing their scent as well, because when they shake, you know, their scent comes out like a plume around them. And that's just another way to communicate who they are to the other dogs who are in the vicinity or who they're just meeting. So I think it's used socially a lot as well.
He will quite arbitrarily lick his bits, not that he has the bits that he used to have, almost as a sort of to change the subject.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, again, sort of like with the bringing the toy to the person at the door, there's a way you could look at dogs that they're just a huge amount of energy, most of which doesn't fit perfectly in the human world. We want them to be polite, to sort of come when we ask and not come other times, to play when we're ready to play, and other times be calm. And so they have a lot of strategies, I think, to sort of self-calm. And we'll see, the more you look for those, the more you'll see them. And I think there are more besides those two, absolutely.
Until December last year, we had two springers, Molly and Murphy, brother and sister from the same litter. 9 years on, and Murphy developed prostate cancer and sadly only lasted 3 months after the diagnosis. Since then, Molly has been so quiet. It feels like she's getting through her day without much interest in anything except food. I guess I'd like to know if dogs do grieve. I think they do. And is the food motivation anything to do with her grieving? Perhaps she's also sensing our grief. That's from Anne-Marie Printy.
I think that's really sensitive observation on her part. And as much as I'll say, I don't know what the subjective experiences of animals, we do have behavioral evidence that dogs grieve, and that's it right there. They change, their personality changes. They enter a depressive-like state. What's one of the ways that depression is manifest in people? It's sort of being withdrawn and eating more, potentially, or eating a lot less. So it sounds, yeah, like they're in a funk, that definite funk. And that's a normal sign, you know, after losing this long-term companion. That's not surprising to me, even though it's very upsetting to see. And should lift after a few more months. If it doesn't lift, you know, I would talk to a veterinarian and say that this is an unusually long depression, and see if you can introduce some new activities, something else for her to attach herself to. But yeah, I think she's grieving the loss of her companion and brother.
This is from Graham Mooney. Soon to get a puppy, wondering about the best way to introduce it to our cat.
Yeah, respecting the cat, I think. So the puppy's going to be real excited about this moving animal. And I think the cat has to have two things. The cat has to have spaces that she or he can go, which are puppy free. So it might be high spaces, that might be rooms. And the cat has to teach the puppy herself how to behave around the puppy. So, you know, the earlier you do it, the more likely the puppy will just see the cat as a normal member of their family, right? If you're getting a very young puppy, it's during their socialization period too. And basically any animals that they meet at that time, they'll think of as just kind of like ordinary animals and not super exciting things that you have to chase constantly and harass. So if you get them young and let the cat do the introducing and scold the puppy a little bit if the puppy's too rambunctious, it'll be fine. But definitely give the cat their own space. Let them get away. Otherwise, it can be really harassing for them.
How are your dogs with your cat? And you've got a puppy. So how's the puppy with the cat?
The puppy is still learning with the cat. The dogs are great. The cat, we got a cat who's after the two dogs, and she was a cat being fostered, someone who'd rescued her from the street. And she lived with the dog then and was pretty dog happy. And when she came into our homes, she attached herself to the dogs before she was interested in us. She was sort of terrified of us, but loved to be next to the dogs, to just have that bodily contact to an extent that really surprised them. They're pretty good with her. They have their own, they've worked it out. Our puppy has lived with us now 3 months and still has her moments of, suddenly chasing the cat. And I let the cat turn around and slaughter. That's what her mother would do to her if she was being a pain. And that's what I'm going to allow the cat to do to her. And again, the cat has places she can go that the puppy can't.
A couple of people asked this, do dogs get jealous? And I would add that if I'm making a fuss of one of them, certainly one of the others will come in and try and nuzzle in and get in pole position.
Yeah. So that's hard to distinguish from just interest in the resource that's being distributed. So most of the jealous behavior that we see is, I'm suddenly paying attention to another dog, or I'm giving food to another dog, and my first dog comes in and tries to get in there. That could be jealousy. It could also be, listen, you're giving out love or you're giving out food. I want some of that. I see that that's available and I want some of that. I don't think they have this, the same kind of envy. I don't see any evidence of that kind of envy. They just are a sort of more acquisitional. Like that's good stuff over there, that love, that food. And I see it being given out. I could be the recipient.
And competitive. I'm going to ask this question. It comes from me. It's not as good as the other questions, obviously. But he hasn't chased after a ball for, 2 or 3 years because of his joints and because he's getting old. He just likes to get out. As I said last time when we spoke, he just likes to get out and sniff and occasionally run for someone's picnic, but not very fast, not as fast as he used to when he used to fly through the air and I used to see that beautiful musculature. No longer so much. But the other day, there was a bunch of people standing there with all their dogs, as they do in parks, and throwing the ball. And 2 or 3 dogs were chasing after it and bringing it back, chasing after it. And he saw this, and he joined in.
I think it's the excitement of that, right? It's the excitement of others doing that behavior. It's still him. That's still who he is. He's still a ball dog, but his body has betrayed him. In the moments when you see there's the excitement of other dogs chasing a ball, then he forgets that for a second, right? I don't know if he's competitive. I don't know. It's hard to tell. But it sounds definitely as though what happens is the excitement of the arousal that happens when you see others doing something. Again, that learning that we were talking about before leads him to do it. And he would do it all the time if his body allowed him.
A lot of people ask this, and I would say the answer is yes, from my own experience. Do they know their siblings?
It's an interesting question. Well, it's not obvious. So they would smell different than other dogs, right? They would smell different than strange dogs because we all have an odor, and siblings will have a more similar odor than non-siblings. But if they haven't been raised together, if they haven't lived together, so they're taken from their mother at 8 weeks and never see each other again until they're 12, I don't ever see dogs recognizing and dealing with that dog differently. So yeah, insofar as they know their family because they've been with their family, yeah, they know them. But if they have been distant from their family, they're not they don't seem to behave differently towards siblings than non-siblings.
Do dogs get headaches? We do sometimes. We'd rather avoid bright lights, loud noises. But if dogs do, of course, they can't tell us. What I would add there is when the thunder's coming, actually way before the thunder's coming, we kind of think, what's wrong with Misty? And she'll run up here to my study and she'll try and get in that cupboard there, which has a load of T-shirts in it, and she'll snuggle into the T-shirt. She knows the weather's changing before we do.
My guess is that they are perceiving maybe a couple different things. It's possible that they have a little bit of electrical detection ability, they sort of can tell a little bit of the static in the air, but also the pressure changes before a thunderstorm. Some people are sensitive to this as well. And when there's a lower pressure, smells rise from the ground. So the dog would be experiencing all of these anticipatory things that have reliably led to a thunderstorm. And so they don't need to have the thunder to know that they should get into their closet of T-shirts. As for the headache, I think it's an interesting question. I have actually never thought about it. We know certainly, I think what's perceptive about that question is that because they aren't telling us these things, we somehow our default is to assume that they don't have them. But just anatomically, or just in terms of a brain and a head, it's very likely that it functions more or less like our brain does. And so they have the same type of occasional vertigo, occasional headaches, And frankly, dogs have been used as medical models, just like lots of other animals in human medicine research, where we were assuming that they have the same kinds of mental states, or like depression, for instance, as we do, or anxiety. They were the model for a drug for depression, or a model for a drug for anxiety. And so it's only somehow, ironically, in those medical situations that we assume, that they're having mental experiences like we are. So as for the headache, probably so.
Cornish Darren, and he asks, it's just a great meandering question. It's great. Do dogs have a philosophy, ethics? If so, are they shaped by ancestry or breeding or rearing? Do they share the philosophy of the main caregiver or the family or the other animals they may live with? Do they understand what it means to be alive and what it means to die? Isn't that great? Number of things in there.
There's a lot of great questions in there. And having a philosophy or an ethics, scientifically what you do is you try to kind of operationalize those words. What would it look like? What would that mean for a nonverbal species? How would I see it? How would I confirm it or find out that it's wrong? I don't know what it would look like for a dog to have a philosophy, but in ethics, you might think, I could break that down into, do they think there are right or wrong ways to behave? And we do see dogs scolding other dogs in social situations like a dog park when they're doing something wrong, right? They're playing too rambunctiously with a dog who isn't ready for it, or they're not coming to the person who's calling them. And we'll see dogs come in and scold. That's fascinating to me. So that means to me that they're seeing that the behavior, not just of themselves, but of other members of their species could be better or worse. So that's like the beginning of an ethics, I think. And as for their sense of their aliveness, I have no idea. I don't know. I can't fathom it. But if we're going to take the scientist's point of view, we would say, well, we're just going to be agnostic. If we're going to take the generous point of view, we'd say, they're more like us than we think. They probably have a conception of being alive. And they certainly notice when things are not alive. So sure, at least rudimentary.
And Michelle says the most important question of all, why can't they live forever?
Oh, God. Isn't it fascinating? We just got a new dog. We have two dogs who are Finnegan and Upton, who are 13 and 11 and a half, and they're big dogs. They're not going to live forever, we realize, and so we're kind of trying to bridge the dogness in our house by getting a young puppy. But just even every time I look at Finnegan, who is the older dog, and is just like such a charmer. He's so delightful and such a professional dog. He'll do all the things with me. If I need a demonstration dog, he's there. He's so responsive. When I look at him and think about his, he doesn't have many years with us. It's unthinkable. It's fascinating because what I don't think people get when they adopt a dog is that, one, they might adopt a dog or buy a dog impulsively. I don't think they're thinking, I want to have a dog for 17 years or whatever it's going to be. And that's maybe part of the surprise and difficulty some people have in dealing with a dog who is no longer a puppy after 6 months or a year and has a lot of needs a lot of taking care of. On the other hand, during those 17 years, they start thinking, well, that 17 years is going to be way too short. So we have not reconciled with dogs' short lifespans. Yeah. What can I say? I loved thinking about the questions that people who live with dogs have versus the questions that science asks, which are usually not the same at all, right? And as a person who wears both hats, I appreciate when owners are thinking about their dogs, basically, right? They're worth our consideration.
Finally, of all the experiments that you've done in your dog dog cognition studies, has there been any that has particularly surprised you?
You know, the one I did a couple of years ago, I really loved. I was trying to do a mirror self-recognition test with dogs. You know, this is a test where they run with primates, where they see if they can recognize themselves in the mirror, because the idea is that's sort of a self-awareness. And they do it by putting a little mark on the chimpanzee's forehead surreptitiously and seeing when they see themselves in the mirror if they move to touch the mark. So dogs don't pass this test. You know, if you mark them and show them a mirror, they are pretty good at understanding that things are in mirrors that are behind them and so forth, but they don't look at the thing on their forehead and say, oh, like I gotta get that thing off. So they fail the test. But I thought, well, that's an unfair test for dogs. First of all, they don't really care if they've got stuff on them. Like often that's what they're driving towards, right? They're rolling in things to have stuff on them. Second, they're non-visual creatures, right? If they were gonna pass that test, it would be an olfactory mirror, one that sort of smelled like they did. And yet I wasn't sure how they would perform. So I created a little kind of analog to that study where I presented them with their odor. And then I added a mark to it, basically, like that red mark on the chimp's forehead. And I thought, well, let's see if they notice the difference. And their own odor was a little bit of their own pee that their owners had collected for them. And we put it in a canister. And we also presented them with the pee of dogs they'd never met before. And we were basically looking at how long they sniffed each of the odors. And even without any other cues, even without having placed it there, they weren't that interested in their smell. They recognized that that was their smell and they didn't smell it very long. But when it had this extra mark in it, they did. You know, they smelled it much longer. They were much more interested in it, and way more interested in that than just the mark by itself. It wasn't just an interesting smell. It was that they seemed to think that that's me. I don't know how that got there, but that's me. And I smell different. And that's weird. I got to investigate that some more, which I thought was amazing and very, very cool and surprising that they might be sort of recognizing themselves in their own odor. And it really changed the way I looked at my dogs walking around and sniffing other dogs and sniffing where dogs had peed or had marked, thinking that they really seeing, you know, I've been here, these other dogs have been over here, you know, something's wrong with this dog. This is a dog I usually see, but something's wrong. And then they go investigate that dog when they see them. You know, that's very cool to imagine that all that information about themselves might be in their smell. Really different than how we see the world, but really complex and interesting.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. And, you know,
Thank you.
come back anytime.